Over my career, I've done a lot of interviews with some well-known people and some people no one's heard about before. I thought it might be fun to drag some of them out of the archives and share them here on YouTube. And this time around, we're going to talk to Dave Wood, who you might call him the king of volunteerism. When I lived in Central California, on radio there, I talked to Dave a lot about the things he was doing, and he was always involved. Just as I did, Dave grew up in rural Indiana.
I left for the Navy when I was 18, and then came back at 22. Then I left after graduating Purdue at 26.
What did you study in college?
Electrical engineering.
Wow, I didn't know that. You and I have crossed paths before, but I didn't realize you were an electrical engineer. Did you do that at all? Because I knew you as a white-collar, non-engineering kind of guy.
Well, I was a white-collar engineering marketing kind of guy for high-tech companies in the Silicon Valley.
Is that what brought you west then?
Yeah, I had job offers after college, and the one I accepted brought me to the Silicon Valley.
What was the most exciting assignment you had working in that capacity?
Probably the last thing I did there. There was a man named Guy Kawasaki that developed a function at Apple called the Technology Evangelist, and he would take Apple's new technology around the world to try to get adopters. And the company that I worked for was developing interface technology for the PC rather than the Mac, and it was developing the capability for all the things that talk to the PC today. Before we started, the only thing that a PC talked to was its own hard drive, and today it talks to TVs and cameras and movies and phones and a number of different things. Well, we developed that interface technology, so I was traveling the world talking to anyone who made any of those devices who wanted to direct access to the PC so that their material could get put on a PC and enjoy that technology.
I know all those programming languages are so interesting. I saw a documentary one time on the internet, and I don't have the numbers in my mind, but they were talking about the fact that so many of the different colleges and governments and military installations that had their own little intranets, I guess you would call it, spoke in various different languages, and they had to come up with 6 or 7 different translator boxes to form a common language before the internet was going to work.
Correct.
And I did not realize at the time how, I guess, it goes back as far as the 40s when they had the UNIVAC and the ENIAC and all those different kind of computers that the universities were trying to come up with the perfect one. A couple of those were compatible and the rest of them weren't with what they finally ended up with.
Right, yeah. It was when I was in engineering school, all the entries to the school's computer were all on punch cards. And a lot of people that are listening have no idea what a punch card is. It goes back to the day even before that 5 1/4-inch disk drive that, or the floppy, the real floppy drive. None of that existed back then.
I remember I was watching an old episode of Dragnet the other night, and they had some clues about the identity of this criminal. They knew he was very short, had red hair, and they knew what his MO, his modus operandi, his usual method of committing crimes was. So they went to the statistician at the LAPD and ran these huge stacks of cards I'm trying to figure out what to compare them to. If you took a piece of typing paper and cut it into horizontal thirds.
That's exactly the size.
It is the size? Okay. They would stack those up, and they all had holes in various places, and they would run them through a machine. And did little fingers come up and read through those holes?
Yes, it was all mechanical.
All electrical switches, but they had cards that basically said red hair, and they had cards whatever. But what I was going to say is my roommate in college was taking, was it called Fortran? That was one of the languages of the computers. He was running across campus and dropped his stack of cards.
Oh, that was me.
That was you when they all got out of order.
Yes, I did that at 6 in the morning, and the only thing that you can do there, because the cards weren't numbered, is that you throw them away, and you go back to the punch machine, and you punch in your entire program again, and the deck of cards tends to be on, well, at least on the programs that we were running, tended to be around a foot to a foot and a half long of these, thin paper stacks. So it was, thousands. And, yeah, I actually dropped mine, too.
But it is amazing what's happened to hardware. In my industry in broadcasting, the first portable tape recorder I had, which used open-reel tape, and try to find some of that now.
I still have one.
Well, I'd love to hear it. It weighed, with the 12D batteries that went in it, weighed 27 pounds. I'm recording this interview on a little recorder that is about the size of 2 popsicles.
Right.
And it can record 28 hours in stereo, and it's so light you can lose it in your pant cuff. Just amazing. But anyway, you were traveling the world trying to convince companies that you had a company that could now let their product talk to a computer. Is that the short way of saying it?
Right, and we needed their technology, because we had the PC's technology. We needed their technology to put on the other side of the card to marry those two technologies together so they could talk to one another.
I remember in that documentary I saw about the Internet, and you may have heard of this, the person who sent the first email sent it from one side of his office to the other. That was like the Wright brothers. But he figured out how to get different computers to talk to each other. That must have been a lot of fun, though, to be, if not on the ground floor of all that technology, to be in there very early.
Oh, looking back it was, but when we were going through it, it was pretty tedious, because if you think about those that know how to program, you just sit at home and do your work. But back then, you had to go to a major facility like a university, and there were only so many punch card machines, and there were thousands of students, and there were only so many hours in a day. And so you had to find a time frame when those machines were available or unattended. And for me, it was basically 5 o'clock in the morning when I would be doing that.
Yeah, telecommuting would have been absolutely unthinkable back then.
Well, yeah, it was impossible. You couldn't do it.
Tell us about some of the places you got to visit. I mean, I've traveled domestically. I finally went to my 50th state the other day.
Oh, I've been to 45, so.
Which was Hawaii. And everybody said, well, everybody goes to Hawaii first. I said, no, I've just not been there. Anyway, but I have traveled darn little outside the U.S. I've been to England and Scotland and France, and of all places, Malta. But that's it. Well, Canada and Mexico. Where all did you go on your junkets there, and where would you go back to if you had the chance?
Probably go back to all of them, but I used to do what became known as death marches, because I would do a country a day, and I would start in Asia, and a typical first week would be Japan on Monday, Korea on Tuesday, Taiwan on Wednesday, Hong Kong on Thursday, Singapore on Friday, and then the second week typically would be London on Monday, probably Munich on Tuesday, a stop in Italy on Wednesday, southern France on Thursday, and then probably back to Ireland or Scotland on Friday, and then off to the east coast of the U.S. doing the same thing, to try to make as many connections as I could make in a short period of time on one round-the-world flight. But in the process of doing that, I got to stop in, I don't know, I think it's been almost as many countries as I have been in states. I've been in 45 states, and it's probably close to that in countries. It might be 40 different countries, but some of them I was just passing through.
Boy, I hope you got frequent flyer mileage.
Frequent flyer mileage. It took me years to give them away and use them up. Probably the most interesting pair of trips that I took was in December. I left Singapore, which is 90 degrees from the equator and very warm even in December. Got on the plane in Singapore and got off the plane in Sweden in December. And so it was very cold when I got off, a hard trip to pack for. I still, after I landed, had a 2-hour drive in the pitch dark in the middle of the afternoon to get to where I was going. And 6 months later, in June, made the same trip, got on the plane in Singapore, got off the plane in Sweden, made my drive, got to my location at about 1 o'clock in the morning, and the streets were full. And I stopped a guy on the street as I was heading for my hotel, and I said, "What's going on?" He goes, "What do you mean?" I says, "Why are so many people out?" He said, "It's summer." That was his answer. And I said, "Well, where are you going?" He says, "Well, we just finished the theater, and we're heading out to dinner."
So they use the daylight when they get it.
Right.
You know, also somewhere up in there, Sweden, Denmark, Finland, there's a midnight golf tournament that they have during the summer up there.
Yeah, well, the sun sets, I mean, depending on how far north you are, it doesn't get pitch black in the summer because the sun basically dips down below the horizon for maybe 2-3 hours and then comes back up. So it never gets far enough off the horizon for it to get pitch black.
I think I could handle living in a place where there was near perpetual daylight because you can always black out your windows. I'm not sure psychologically I could handle endless night.
Right. Yeah, the trade-off is winter.
Well, it's like here in Palm Springs. We are recording this on a day when it's 116 degrees here. It's very rare, and there is a heat alert, but it's that time of year. But by the same token, we have gorgeous winters here, which is why being 2 hours out of L.A., all the Hollywood stars came over here in the winter. It's not that much better than the weather in L.A., but it is warmer. So, you know, I tell people when they're here, if they're saying, "How can you live in a place like this?" I say, well, come back in February. You know, you'll be out at the pool. But no, I could understand. I mean, I understand physically how the earth tilts and the sun, and the thing of it is, in the very strongest part of summer, in the highest latitudes, the sun is still skimming over the top of the globe because it's convecting through the atmosphere. So you're right. I have heard that even when it is supposed to be pitch dark, there's still a little glow on the horizon. Boy, I cannot imagine going from country to country day after day. I guess this was before 9/11 and a lot of inspections.
It was initially, and then I was there doing one of those trips during Desert Storm. So I was in Italy, and Italy was very nervous of what was going to happen because they were the closest thing to Iraq. And there were some pretty tense moments in the airports as the soldiers would come through and trip the metal detector and turn around and point their AK-47s at the crowd, not realizing what had just happened.
Well, I know when I was on Malta, which is 3 islands south of Italy, the closest African country was Libya. And I thought, wow, you know, it'd be nice to say I'd been to Africa, and my tour guide, and all the tour guides on Malta having nasal British accent. They were all trained in England. And the fellow said to me, you don't want to really go there, do you? And I said, why not? He sounded like Jack Hawkins. I said, why not? He said, that is not a safe place. So, no, I didn't go to Libya.
So even before 9/11, it was a nervous time.
Yeah, thank God we live here, at least for the time being.
About the only place to go back then was probably Morocco, possibly Egypt, but yeah, the rest of it, isn't safe now.
So you made a move, though, eventually away from Silicon Valley to something else that takes a lot of smarts, and that's dealing with stocks and bonds. And when I crossed paths with you, that's what you were doing. How did you make that transition?
After so many trips, and I think my last year in high tech, I traveled 250,000 miles. There was one of the tech recessions, and during a tech recession, most technology companies really pull in their horns, especially on the new technology. One, because they don't know how long that recession is going to last, and they don't know the condition of technology at the end of that. And so, not wanting to waste any R&D money, they stopped progress on a lot of the newer things that I was working on. The interface technology was already moving, so that was doing well. And I just decided that it was time to leave, and we wrote me out of the company, and I took some time off to decompress, because even with all those trips, I didn't have vacations. And then in the process of thinking about what might be next and applying for different jobs, an investment job came along, and I thought through some of the things that I was doing to help my company acquire other companies, and I thought, well, this would be a different version of the same thing, except doing it for real people instead of bigger corporations, and I want to give it a try. And that's where it all started. I actually started in D.C. For a hedge fund manager, building him a sales team, and then ended up moving back to California for family, and stayed in the industry and joined Edward Jones in 2001. And just kept moving forward from there.
When you look at how Silicon Valley, which is kind of the area between San Francisco and San Jose, in the center of California on the Pacific coast, how that's had its ups and downs. I remember covering, I was still living in D.C., the fact that the San Jose Symphony was almost entirely funded by some of those Silicon Valley companies, and when the companies went bust, I think the San Jose Symphony declared bankruptcy. I think it went dark.
They did.
So a lot of people hinging their futures on that. So you had skills that lent themselves to going to Edward Jones, probably. Is it the oldest company of its kind? Because the Jones in Edward Jones is from Dow Jones, isn't it?
No, it's not. It's
I always thought it was the same guy.
It's from Edward, and then his son Ted. But I mean, we go back a long way. I don't know if we're any older than any of the other really big names, but the late 1800s is where we go back to. That's where we trace our roots back to there.
What's really interesting is to look at the Dow Jones Industrials. Now, I know when I started in radio in the 60s, the minimum wage was $1.25. So the stock market commensurately would have been proportional backward. But I can remember, I think, being on radio, and the Dow Jones Industrials were 200 or 400 or something, and now they're 17,000.
Yeah.
So is that inflation, or is it the fact that the stock market is actually stronger?
It's really inflation. I mean, there have been a lot of changes to the Dow index, where some companies have been eliminated and other companies have been added, but basically it's inflation. I mean, the car companies that were in it back then were selling cars for $1,000, and now they're selling cars for $50,000, and so a lot of that was inflation.
Well, now, the market indicator we look at the most, I mean, on the air, I read the Dow, the NASDAQ, and the S&P, and that's pretty standard. And the 30 industrials are the ones that get quoted if you only have time to quote one. Is there an industrial on that list that was there on the Dow from day one?
There are, and I don't know.
I'm thinking General Electric was maybe there, but I don't know. I mean, it is, you always hear General Electric as being kind of the quintessential stable company.
Well, and it's almost like a mutual fund all in itself, because they make jet engines and elevators and light bulbs, and they do financing, and they have a number of fronts that they cover that span a lot of industries.
I never thought about that. You were comparing it to a mutual fund. Before we move on to the real reason I want to talk to you, which is about the importance of volunteerism, let me throw out a couple of phrases that I come across dealing with the stock market that I'm not really sure what they are. Can you redefine what a mutual fund is?
Think of the fund itself like a basket. So let's say a grocery basket, whatever basket you want. And the fund, depending on the way it's defined, and the definition is very important, may only have companies that make food in them, or companies that do retail in them, or companies that are in China in them. And so there is a theme to the basket. And the stocks or the companies that are within there have to fit that definition in order for it to have credibility, and in order for it to be something investable. And so you will typically have maybe 100 different stocks inside a mutual fund, and it may be Apple and IBM and Google and Facebook and Twitter and on and on. And one of to me, the nice things about a mutual fund that makes it safer is that, let's say that you bought Twitter stock and I bought a mutual fund that had Twitter stock in it. Your money is 100% in that company. My money is maybe 2% in that company. And if that company goes bankrupt, I lose 2%, you lose it all.
So it is that old word diversity put into play. Yeah. Is there a broadcast mutual fund?
I don't know. You want to be careful not to get too narrow, because let's take a look at what could be happening going forward to cable TV. If you look at what's moving in with Hulu and Chromecast and the different things that are encroaching on that territory, and
because I was thinking, as a layman, it would seem that a person should invest in a mutual fund in an area in which he or she has some expertise.
And so you could have a segment of the market that seriously begins to struggle, and if that's where all of your money is, then your money begins to struggle. And so in order to further diversify, I agree with your premise, is that you want to have money in something where your expertise is, but you also want to have money in what we would call defensive stocks. Is no matter what happens to the economy, everybody has to eat. And so you might have food stocks or toothpaste and different things that you're always going to use in order to further diversify or further broaden your holdings. So the sector funds, it's okay for a smaller part of your money, but you want to make sure that you're able to maintain a reasonable growth, and you don't suffer huge downsides because of one sector having trouble or one company having trouble. And that's where the good companies that have been around for a very long time have been flexible enough to respond. One of the keys to the success of a company over a long period of time, decades, is their flexibility to move from the older product or the older standard into the new product or the newer standard. Like maybe a company that used to make buggy whips switched into car tires. And maybe a company that used to make horse and buggies started making automobiles.
Well, and there are many, many examples of how different industries have very quickly become obsoleted. Now, sometimes it will be because of government regulations. I can't think of any offhand, but they'll stop using a certain pesticide or a certain agricultural practice, and that puts the kibosh on those companies. Look at what likely happened to radio stocks when television came in. So you never know where the next trend is, and I would guess a lot of that is now being dictated by technology and by the Internet.
Well, and a company that's just begun to have some success in remaking itself is Intel. And you think Intel is somebody pretty brand new, even though they've been around since, I think, 70, is that they were the king of the microprocessor for computers, and then for desktops, and then for laptops. And where they started getting beat was when all this processing power went into phones and then into tablets. That was not Intel. And so they have begun to see a lot of success now in moving forward into that with their expertise, and now morphing into a new type processor or a new type product. So even somebody as new as Intel and Microsoft have to make current changes, because there's a revolution going on now in technology. It's not just evolutionary, it's becoming more revolutionary now.
David, you've had an incredible career so far and traveled the world for a Silicon Valley company, and now you're trying to help people invest in the future. Let's move to that and then talk about the main thing I want to talk about today, and that is one more area of investments and that kind of thing. I'm a classic example of someone who was married to his job, lived right at the margin all my life, never had a nice car, nice place. You know, I'm probably the only older guy here in Palm Springs who doesn't have antiques, but I survived. And somehow I managed to travel to all 50 states and have a reasonably good time. But I never thought about putting stuff away for retirement until it was time to retire. Do you hear that story a lot?
Yeah, the baby boomers, of which I am one, have, I guess you would call it a reputation for living in the day. And the prior generation did a very good job of saving and using savings bonds and trying to invest for the future, and the baby boomers have come along and tend to spend more than they save or invest. And unfortunately, I see it more often than I'd like.
Was our generation spoiled by our parents? Were we sheltered from all of this? I mean, I think part of the mindset is that the generation that went through the Depression did not want to see it happen to us, and in a way sheltered us from a lot of things.
Well, I'm not sure if it was being sheltered or if it was just the communication style of the day, where they didn't talk about all those many things, and I don't know how much of it was taught, because in my parents' generation, 401ks didn't exist, but pensions did, and so all they had to do was work, and whether they worked for AT&T or General Motors or the government, there was a pension building up for them, and so they were going to have some income when work ended. Well, for the baby boomers, very few baby boomers have a pension. There's Social Security, but typically that's not enough to live on. And then 401ks came along, and we really weren't taught the discipline of the importance of contributing to the 401k, because previous generation didn't have that. It was a foreign thing to them.
And I think a lot of people didn't talk about money. I know my mom went to a seminar before my dad died, talking to women about how they needed to ask their husbands where the safe deposit box key is, where the insurance stuff is, and to try to get their name on something. Because in our parents' generation, quite often the husband would die, and even though the mother had contributed incredibly to the household for decades, she didn't exist. Her name wasn't on a loan. She didn't have a credit card. And I think maybe, men and women just didn't talk to each other about finance. So you're right. They didn't have those communication skills to pass it on to their kids. They didn't talk about sex, and they didn't talk about money.
Right. And then the change from pension to 401k came in, and they didn't even know about that, even if they did converse, even if they did teach their kids. It's something they couldn't teach them.
Absolutely. And even though I worked for one company for 20 years, United Press International, which I guess had a 401k, I didn't hear that, And having been single all my life, I didn't have a partner to say, hey, Dennis, you ought to listen to this stuff. So when I retired from UPI after 20 years, because the company had gone through 6 owners, my pension for 20 years' work is $103 a month. And I don't know whether it's sadder to see that happen, or the people who had wonderful plans for the future and lost everything in the housing market, or their company's pension just dried up. I mean, you see that happening. Okay, let's talk about your extracurricular activities. And in a modern day, I guess I shouldn't say that because that evokes a lot of other things. You are there in the Central Valley of California, and you have contributed so much to a lot of projects. You may still be, but at one time you were active with the Air Museum up there. And I know I did one of these shows with Fred Pillsbury, who's a retired B-52 flight crew member. If I may editorialize here, I think the Castle Air Museum in Atwater, California, is the most under-discovered air museum in the world. Every time the ratings come out, you don't see them. Why is that? Because the planes are outside?
Well, one, it's because of where we're located, is that we're not near a big city. And so you have the Smithsonian Museum at Dulles, and you have a number of museums that are on active bases or on recently retired bases. And Atwater is, if you're driving on Highway 5, you don't even see it. And if you're driving on Highway 99, it's only 2 exits. And so it's not something that you're going to see a lot of. And Castle Air Museum is 100% donor supported, and so there's no government money in there, and there wasn't an advertising budget. We're doing, and as we grow and as we've been around longer and longer, we're getting more and more people hearing from us because we're able to tell more people about us. We're able to reach further and further, but we go back, 33 years now, and in the beginning, it was just a handful of airplanes, and now we're up to 56 on the grounds, and we have another 6 or 8 pre-World War II planes that can't be put outside, and another 3 or 4 that are in restoration that will, over time, be brought out onto the grounds. Our reputation, after talking to a number of people in the Air Force and in the Navy and the retired people, our reputation is the quality of the product that we turn out. The care that we put into our airplanes is really unmatched, and now that we're at 56, we're getting to be more known. Our issue now is weather. And the current project that I'm working on is to try to house all those aircraft. We will start with a manageable project of a couple of acres and put as many aircraft as appropriate in those hangars. One will be our Air Force One that we acquired in October. It's a DC-9 version. It's not the 747, but President Reagan and President Clinton both flew on this aircraft, and all the first ladies in between, all the vice presidents in between, and so forth. And so we were chosen to receive one of only 3 models that were available, and we were the first choice for the model that we received. So the reputation is building, but the advertising is an expense that we have to be very careful as far as how we manage our money.
Well, the thing that impresses me also, and it's what I want to talk about here in this part of the broadcast, is the volunteer, the wealth of volunteers that you have. And the neat thing is, like Fred Pillsbury, you have people there who actually flew in those planes. And the people who are restoring them, luckily, are left over from the old Air Force base who just decided to live there when the base closed. That's enviable that you have professionals who look at these planes as being part of their life, and that's why they take care of them.
Yeah, it's amazing to see some of the restoration volunteers that have been there since day one. We have a couple of guys in their 90s that are still very active, very able. The nice thing that's happening now that we grow is that we're getting a lot of newer, younger volunteers come in with a lot of skills and a willingness to learn, and the existing team there has a willingness to teach. So it bodes well for us going forward with the capability and the perfectionism that these guys are passing on, because when they roll out an aircraft, some of the aircraft as they come in are just one big bucket of rust. And when they turn them out, they look brand new. And they're all historically correct. They're all equipment correct. We don't allow anything substandard to go out. But when they paint a plane and bring it out, it looks like a model.
And I think Pillsbury was telling me that the B-52 you have, and the Air Force base there was the B-52 training base for everybody during the Cold War. He said except for the equipment that was secret that they couldn't leave in, your B-52 probably has the most complete interior of any B-52 on display.
Yeah, and that can be said of all of our aircraft. We have the correct faceplate on even the confidential equipment that was in there. The equipment is not in there, but the look and feel of even the cockpit is correct.
So you need to tell Hollywood that. No, they can do it. They can do it digitally anymore. You know, the other day, and there's an air museum here in Palm Springs, the Palm Springs Air Museum. One of my cohorts is making a big deal. They're having what's called an open cockpit day. My golly, you get to go in and look in the plane. And I said to him, wait a minute, that's not a new idea.
It is for some people, but we are trying to think how far we're into that. I think we're approaching our 20th coming up.
Explain what that means.
We actually allow people, we open up the cockpit so that people can go, like on the fighters, up on stands, look inside the aircraft to see what the cockpit is like, to see the instruments, to see the equipment, to see the size of the cockpit. And we typically open up, I think now we're up to 30 or 35 that we tend to open up in each open cockpit day. And with some of the bigger aircraft like the tankers, you can actually walk through and be inside some of the larger aircraft to see what it was like in there.
What is it like when you have someone who comes and wants to volunteer? bring his or her area of expertise, and you start showing them these planes, particularly if they haven't been there before. I mean, there must be a lot of wonderment in their eyes. I know I was just enwrapped when I would go around there, even though I visited many times.
Well, I mean, typically with our typical new volunteer, it's that first visit that causes them to want to volunteer. They actually come out and will either attend an open cockpit day or will visit the museum and then understand what we're doing and say that they want to join in. Some of our volunteers would be recent retirees that always wanted to volunteer but never had the time. And they will, that will be the other major source of new volunteers that we get would be recent retirees.
The other areas, and I don't know how many, if any of these you're active in, the other areas where I think volunteers do such good work are the social, the other areas I've always felt where volunteers do such good work, but we don't think of them as being volunteers, are organizations such as Kiwanis, Rotary, Civitan, some of those groups. They maintain parks in cities. And in the city where you are, is it Rotary that's put so much money into a city park?
They out at the Lake Yosemite, the Rotary has built a number of structures out there and barbecue areas and so forth. The Kiwanis have maintained, I think they call it a playland, where there are there's a small zoo and there's a small train that you can ride. So the Kiwanis are also very active. The Elks are active, so there are and VFW. So there are a number of organizations. I mean, that's one of the nice things when you get into and I guess you would call it a smaller community, is that there is a lot more camaraderie, a lot more volunteerism that goes on, and a lot of the organizations work together. The Kiwanis help us, Rotary helps us. When we do some of our events, we try to help them in some of their events. So there's some camaraderie between organizations that happens at least around here.
That is great, and I know if I can move this over to schools. I grew up, as my listeners know, in rural Indiana, went to a Catholic high school. There are only 65 of us, but I think I was in 11 or 12 different organizations when I was a senior. Later, I would meet kids who went to public schools, and they would say, I didn't get a name like that. And I started to realize that in big cities, it's almost, or at least was, it's almost not the right thing to do to get into those clubs, because that's a bunch of do-gooders. And I fully agree with you. I mean, you can get a lot done in a big city. But in a city, say, of 25,000, 30,000, my hometown, 10,000, where everybody knows everybody, when something happens in that town, people will work together, even if one's with Civitan, one's with Rotary, one's with Columbus, somebody's in the Masonic Lodge, and the other guy's with the Knights of Columbus.
And I also grew up in a small town in Indiana. Same thing, is that it's almost like the certain things that need to be done in a community. In a smaller town, you have smaller population, and so you may have to do 2 or 3 things to get a service or a product or something done for the community, where in a large city it only takes 2% of the people to do whatever the service or event is. In a smaller community, it may take half the town to get it done, and it becomes a way of life, and it becomes rewarding. I guess one suggestion that I would make to the people who listen is find your passion and look around you and find a way to help somebody or help yourself that's not going to happen at work. It's going to happen out in the community. But whatever your passion is, whether it's trees or parks or children or education or airplanes or whatever it is, look for it and you'll find it.
Absolutely, because if you're going to volunteer, it should be something that you love doing. I mean, if you're a seamstress, help people who are making quilts for babies or something. It's just a matter of looking out and finding who needs help.
And finding something that you enjoy or enriches you in some way. And your life is not full, your life is not complete unless you're out there exploring and finding your passion, and hopefully your passion leads to some kind of volunteerism or some kind of help to mankind during your life, or I don't think your life is complete as it could be.
I guess it's pretty safe to say, and probably incredibly simplistic, that were it not for volunteers, many of whom are invisible, an awful lot of the things we take for granted wouldn't work.
And if there's not, start one.
Yeah, it's a great thing to do. You know, I don't necessarily practice what I preach, but I've been doing a lot of soul searching recently about volunteering my time, and I'm going to see if there's a reading for the blind here in this area. Dave Wood, thanks for taking the time to join us by our little radio magic here from Central California. I didn't know, even though you and I have known each other for a while, I didn't know you had all that background in Silicon Valley. I'm really happy you got to travel. It may have been overkill, though.
It may have been, but I'm trying to make up for it now, is that I'm trying to find either places where I haven't been and go spend a week, or places that fascinated me when I was just passing through and go there for a week. So I'm trying to make up for, I guess you would call it, lost time.
If you want some domestic suggestions, spend a week in Branson, Missouri.
That's what I've heard, yeah.
Or go to Bozeman, Montana.
Right, I've been there.
Key West, Florida.
Yeah, been there, yeah.
Okay, Santa Fe, New Mexico.
Of course.
And Burlington, Vermont.
Right, I've been there.
And while you're in Burlington, go over to Ben and Jerry's.
Of course.
Dave Wood, thanks for joining us, and tell everybody who may remember me up in that neck of the woods I said hello.
Everybody remembers you, Dennis. I'll tell them you said hi.
Hope you enjoyed that. Thanks for going back into the archives with me. I'm Dennis Daly. See you next time, right here on YouTube.